Alright guys, you asked for this video. This is a long-awaited review of The Other History of the DC Universe, Issue 2. What's up guys, BJ Kicks here. I buy comics, I read them, and I review them, all for your viewing pleasure. So if you're new here, welcome, and if you're not, welcome back. Now if you're interested in comic book reviews, unboxings, overviews, hauls, all that type of stuff, you should definitely hit the subscribe button, then hit the bell icon so that you're notified whenever I post new videos. Now, this video was long awaited, and I almost wasn't going to make it, but you guys just kept requesting this video. So one of the first videos to kind of blow up, so to speak, on this channel was my review of The Other History of the DC Universe #1. I released that video on Thanksgiving Day, back when I had like no followers, no subscribers at all, and here we are, almost at 1,000. But anyway, I found The Other History of the DC Universe by John Ridley and Giuseppe Camuncoli and Andrea Cucchi and Jose Villarrubia. This is the same creative team from issue 1. I found issue 1 to be very, very refreshing. I found it to be timely. My words for that issue were, it was necessary. That's how I summed up that book. And that book, exploring the back history or the storytelling of Jefferson Pierce, narrating how he became Black Lightning and how he navigated his social and economic space while being Black Lightning, and the effects that it had on his psyche, on his family life, and all of the above. I really, really enjoyed that book and that take. And it spoke to so many things that I could relate to as a comics fan. And that got me very excited about the rest of the series. This is going to be a 5-part series, and each book is kind of its own standalone story. Now, I actually bought this book digitally just so that we can go over it together. So I'm going to switch up the view. We're going to jump in the computer and take a look at this book together. All right. I had to bring back the review screen. I had to bring back the overlays because I wanted to go over this book with you guys. Now, this is The Other History of the DC Universe #2. And if you saw my review of issue #1, then you know it was a very glowing review. I was very excited about it. I felt like it was refreshing to see a comic explore a lot of the themes that were explored in issue #1. With issue #2, well, with issue #1, I think there were a few things that worked to my advantage. One, I didn't know a whole lot about Black Lightning, except that when I've seen him in the past, he's an angry black man, right? And then also what worked in its favor was a lot of the things that were happening I was seeing for the first time. So I think a lot of my excitement about the book was just, the first time you experience something, it's like going on a roller coaster. The first time is like really, really, really great. And the second time, it's the same exact ride, but because you've been up and down the ride before, you know what to expect. So there's not as much adrenaline rush that comes with it. And I think that is what, sort of holds this issue back in my mind, although it's still a great issue. So let's take a look at just what's going on with this book. So The Other History of the DC Universe, of course, each book is focused on a specific time period, told from the perspective of a specific character. Last one was Black Lightning, Jefferson Pierce. This time we've got Karen Beecher and Mal Duncan, and they are covering the time period from 1970 to 1989. And so what I love about The Other History of the DC Universe is they retell events of DC's history, things that you may have forgotten about, or in my case, never known about. So they serve as like a primer on who the characters are, but taking into account, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, political status, and things going on at the time, and real life history, helping to make it more real for the audience. So there's some things that are explored in this issue that are pretty exciting. Anyway, on the screen, you can see the credits, and they're on the little bumper as well. So already on page 1 right here, we are introduced to how this story is going to be told. And it's basically, we've got dueling narratives. We got two voices. We got Mal Duncan and we got Karen Beecher-Duncan, aka the Guardian and Bumblebee. Now, of course, these two were both former members of the Teen Titans, and they married each other. And so they have a long history together and a long history with heroes in the DC universe. And right off the bat, we kind of get the first bit of characterization. So Mal Duncan is like, hey, just so you know, I'm happy to tell this story with my wife, but she wasn't always there. So, a lot of what she's telling you is secondhand, meaning, hey, she might bash some people, but she's only doing that because she wasn't there. She only had my version of the events to base her feelings off of. It's like when you tell your family like the whack things that your boyfriend or your ex-boyfriend does, and they kind of outshadow the good things because you don't tell them that stuff, right? And then we got Karen's point of view, and she's basically saying, look, I was around plenty. And she says, Malcolm is a good man, but he's got a problem being 100% forthcoming. And he thinks I've had issues with the Teen Titans, and that's going to color my perspective. But I'm cool with everybody. And that stuff they put him through, I'm not tripping on it. Not even, is what she says. So right off the bat, we get Mal introducing himself as, how he became who he became. Right. And what's funny is, like, for the longest time, he didn't even have a superhero identity, but we can talk about that later because that does kind of color what went on here. But Mal is explaining the difference between Hell's Corner and Suicide Slum. Now, what's cool is we just got a glimpse of Suicide Slum in issue number 1. So in Suicide Slum, he's saying it's mostly just black people who were being mistreated, but in Hell's Corner, it was a lot more multicultural. So you have blacks and whites, Hispanics, and even Asians all getting the short end of the stick together. And their neighborhood was riddled with crime and drugs and gangs. But the top dog was a white pride gang called Hell's Hawks. And their leader was a punk calling himself Stormtrooper. And so he came across Stormtrooper trying to harass his little sister. He wasn't standing for that, and so he fought him. And then they went to like a boxing match and fought again, and he beat him both times. And it turns out there were some people in Hell's Corner watching all of this go on. Those people were the Teen Titans in disguise. And so when they asked him to be a part of the Titans, that means he became the first black superhero ever. So here we go. And so that's Mal's version of events. And then here we got in yellow, we got Bumblebee. And she's like, yeah, he likes to embellish. He was not the first black superhero. He might have been the first black guy who got to hang out with superheroes, but he wasn't superpowered. John Stewart was the first black superhero. And everybody calls him the part-time Green Lantern, but he was still first. And then there was Black Lightning. And then you had Mal. But then so then she's kind of telling her version of the events and how the Titans recruited him and what she felt about it. And she says being a part of the Titans, wasn't exactly a healthy situation for Mal. So then she's goes back into how she met Mal Duncan. And she was attending an all-girls school, and they had a dance with an all-boys school, and they kind of hooked up there. And so she's talking about them hooking up, and then she's telling us how he told her about that fight and how everything went out. And now she's saying that instead of him just beating up this one guy, what actually happened was that guy beat him up pretty badly, and he ended up in the hospital, and it really affected him. And so then she's gets into criticizing his time with the Titans. She says he didn't have a code name or powers. He was just Mal, the black friend. And that's got to bring you down more than it lifts you up. I'm not saying the Titans were trying to make him feel bad on purpose. I'm just telling you how it was. And she says the Titans back then were a messed up group of people. They were children. But think about what a group of teenagers is like. Every one of the Titans had something they were trying to work out. It was just a whole lot of high school drama amped up on hormones. And then they allude to some things that happened with Aqualad that honestly I don't know the history of. But anyway, so this is kind of how the story goes. Each little point you get narrated by one and then the other. So here's Mal talking again, and then there's Karen talking again. Now, what's really cool is basically they're talking about how the Teen Titans broke up, and Mal ended up having to kind of just guard the Teen Titans Tower. But no one had ever really considered Mal. It was kind of an afterthought. But anyway, so now here's where I think there's some strength in this series. She talks about how in the mid 70s were a directionless time, and talking about how the civil rights movement was over, but there was a lot of other stuff going on. The white flight happened, and schools didn't integrate, and they went to war, and people started fighting, and there was random fighting in a bunch of different cities. So yeah, they're just talking about civil unrest at the time, which obviously happened in America. And then there's this really cool page talking about Arthur Ashe and just how much he meant to the culture to watch him win in real life while all that other stuff was going on. And then we get more into Mal's story. And I don't want to read everything. I just wanted to focus on some pretty interesting moments. So we've got the moment where they get married. And that's pretty cool. And then there's also a point where they talk about the Atlanta child murders. And I won't spoil why it's so great. I want you guys to read this book. But again, we go back and forth from Mal telling his story to Karen telling her story, and also them both kind of telling the story of, basically Black America at the time. And then she talks about how the Titans got back together, and basically, I wanted to bring it to the end. So here we go. If I had to sum up my years with the Titans in a couple words, it was complicated. As people, they were difficult. As friends, they were fair weather. As heroes, they were far from perfect. But as a group, we all learned to stand up for what we believed in. We learned to stand shoulder to shoulder, no matter the odds. And even when we stood apart from the world, we never stood alone. We had each other. In our time with the Titans, Malcolm was matured from a kid who was awkward to a man that was righteous. And I earned the confidence to evolve from being a girl geek and to take my love of science and use it practically and even heroically. Our years with the Titans shaped Mal and me, and I ask that they forgive me for my shortcomings as I forgive them. And the past is what brings us where we need to be. So if you guys remember my review of the Other History of the DC Universe #1, I talked about how Black Lightning, he kind of deals with this thing where he's like just the angry person all the time. And I feel like a lot of people missed the lesson at the end, which is very similar to the lesson here, where basically we have a perspective that, okay, the Titans were just not all they're cracked up to be, like, because they didn't help Mal. They didn't help, the so-called Black issues, right? And over time, Karen, who is basically very cynical, she's got a very cynical point of view, very much like Jefferson Pierce had a cynical point of view. She learns to see people for who they are and what their experiences are. And she's able to forgive what she perceived as shortcomings and also, own up to her own as well. Look at them offering me video games. So she's able to own up to her shortcomings as well. And it works for the better of the story. And I think that's the lesson with all or both of the Other History of the DC Universe books so far. It's not so much about being angry or retaliating for what you perceive as, racism or social injustice, right? That's not necessarily what this is about. It definitely sheds light on those issues. But I love that the ends of these books brings us closer to reconciliation. It's like, this is how I felt. And yes, I'm acknowledging that there were bad things that happened during this time period, but I can also acknowledge where I was wrong. And hopefully we can come together when this is over and push things forward for the future. And I think that is a great analogy and metaphor for how life should be in general. You know, there's a lot of division, and I talked about this on my review of issue number 1. There's a lot of division right now. And we kind of have this idea that in order for me to be right, you have to be wrong. Because what we tend to see are more extreme perspectives in either direction, right? Either, right, the Black Lives Matter movement is just a bunch of terrorists, or every person that's white is racist, right? And it's like, those are the two ideas you get. And so with that, you have everyone's opinions that are colored by the most extreme version of an argument ever. And the reality is, most people aren't over here, right? Most people are right here, but they're being told what to think by people on either side. And it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to have conversations with each other. When we do, we find out that there's a lot more that brings us together than things that separate us. But there's my soapbox. And I think that's the lesson that these books are teaching us. And because of that, I still very, very much recommend this book. I know it sounded like in the beginning, I was like, I don't know, I'm not, whatever. But I really do like this book. What I had as my hang up was that for a second, it kind of felt like, for lack of a better term, like exploitation of trauma, right? And reminders of struggle for no reason other than to be there. But I think the lesson in the end was warranted. And I think each of these books is going to appeal to different people because they may remember these characters from other media, from other time periods. And so it's important to have the same lessons in each book or similar lessons in each book. And it is also important to have a diverse array of characters and perspectives who can kind of speak to some of the same things through different lenses. And so because of that, I really liked this book. I really enjoyed it. It definitely was not a quick read, but it was beautiful. The artwork was great. The storytelling was great. I love the two voices. And I think they were both, I don't know, I can't say they were accurate to the character because I hadn't experienced the characters prior to, but they certainly were accurate to the cultural sensibilities. And I enjoyed that, as a person of color reading comics. But anyway, that's my review of The Other History of the DC Universe #2. It is still a highly recommended series. I can't wait to get into the other 3 books when they come out, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well. And if not, that's always cool. You can always buy what you like. Make sure you read what you buy and be nice to others, because kindness makes the world go round. By the way, in the comments, let me know if you read this book. I'd love to hear your opinions on it. But until next time, peace.